We have been doing a scripture study on Zoom as a parish based on the lectionary cycle. And the last two sessions we've had have been I've found very insightful. And as you listen today, those who were a part of that scripture study will notice thoughts that they gave me about the scriptures to help understand what Jesus is getting at today, because we can bring our experiences to the scriptures. You see, our stories and our lives give flesh to the scripture, our experiences. And this is really how the Gospels were written. They were the Christian community's experience of the risen Lord in their lives. And it really does become, how do these scriptures apply to today's world? And so today, this first reading from Leviticus, where we hear this law with leprosy, I think we have to understand that it wasn't a punishment, but this law was put in place to protect others. And so I think there's a lot of relevancy today, I think, with COVID, that there are ways that a lot of the social distancing and masks and other things are about protecting others. However, the story of Jesus and the leper today reminds us that there are times where the gospel does call us to take risk, to bring healing. And we can see in our society those who, like Jesus, take that great risk. Nurses and medical professionals, grocery store workers, teachers, other essential workers. And I can only think of how many of our parishioners I hear that are taking the risk at St. Agnes to distribute the vaccine so that people can experience healing. This is Jesus' way of bringing wholeness as God uses these people. And the reality is there have been those who have heroically risked their lives and lost their lives in order to bring this healing to others. So today's gospel, Jesus and this leprosy, I would suggest that leprosy has probably been very common for us in the last year. It's that place where we have maybe felt isolated, lonely, and excluded. And in the gospel, imagine this leper approaching Jesus. And perhaps, as someone said in our Bible study, perhaps they were holding Jesus back. Don't touch him. The danger of the disease. And yet Jesus touches that place of guilt, that place of shame, that place of exclusion, and brings him into wholeness. And that's what Jesus desires to do for us. And there does seem in our culture to be a leprosy of division, hatred, exclusion, and resentment, where we keep people at arm's length and we do not see them as our brother and sister. This is the leprosy that Jesus takes upon himself on the cross. In a sense, he becomes the vaccine, the antibiotic that brings about unity and oneness. That Jesus takes our sickness, physical, emotional, spiritual, upon himself and brings healing. So the leper is free now. But notice, listen to what the gospel said. Jesus becomes like the leper. He now can't go into the city like the leper couldn't. He takes his suffering, our sickness upon us in his death and resurrection, that this is symbolic of, to bring about new life. Truly the suffering servant that brings us to wholeness. But those of us that believe this, that we've received this antibiotic, this vaccine of the healing of the risen Lord, it calls for us a response. We were discussing in Bible study the Jesuit priest Gregory Boyle, who works with gang members. And those that have spent time in prison, those who have had rough lives, those who have suffered from addiction. And Gregory Boyle has brought them in as brothers and sisters because this Jesuit has the insight that Jesus did not look down upon anyone, but saw them as a brother or sister. And it's more than a service we offer. Whatever our profession, we can think of things that way. But our call is to what Gregory Boyle calls kinship. That we have the same struggles and joys. That the other person is our brother and sister. I think we've all had experiences, if we're honest, where we've looked down upon another. I share a story of my early days in the seminary. I was working with the homeless. And I was in the back of a van, and my job was to hand out coats to the homeless. And I got real caught up in being productive, getting the job done. Not noticing the person in front of me that I was handing the coat to, and looking at them with love and respect. And so I handed coat after coat after coat. Thought I was doing a good job so that we could get home on our Friday evening. And all of a sudden, a short African-American man came up to the van. And I had a big coat. And I said, "Oh, that won't fit you." And I got a small one and said, "Here." The man looked in my eyes and said, "Brother, I don't need your coat," and walked away. You see, I looked down. I felt about this small. But he taught me something. He taught me that Jesus' call is to see everyone as brother and sister. That the exclusion and difficulties that we face in life, that we're no different. That as Carl Rogers once said, that what seems so unique, which is also sometimes what seems most dark to us, is what we share most in common as brothers and sisters. And you see, the gifts of the margins is that I'm not simply doing a service, but it obliterates the illusion that we're separate. So what Jesus teaches us is that when we stand with the despised and left behind, when we stand with the demonized, it's the call that they will stop being demonized. When we stand with the disposable, it will be so that they will no longer be thrown away. Mother Teresa gives a great diagnosis of the leprosy that we face as a culture. She says that the problem with the world is that we have forgotten that we belong to each other. And that there is a leprosy in all of us that needs to be healed. And it's the part of ourselves that we cannot accept, or we think is unlovable. And who are we called to be for each other as brothers and sisters? We're called to hold up a mirror to others, to let them know that they are exactly what God has in mind. In a sense, to return people to themselves, not to hold a bar up, but a mirror up. That you are exactly, and I am exactly, who God has called you and me to be. And sometimes we have to dismantle messages of shame and disgrace that get in the way, that stop us from helping us to see each other that way. That in a sense we're called to return one another to ourselves. And this past week I was given a poem that reminds us of the call of kinship. And that this kinship is about what we do at this table. That this table breaks through the walls of exclusion in the Eucharist to create a table of inclusion where we begin to see each other as brothers and sisters, that we return each other to ourselves. This mirror draws us in to see ourselves as we truly are, with all of our different stripes and titles, simply brothers and sisters. And this poem could be a prayer of what the Eucharist is intending to do to us, to invite us into that inclusive banquet of the kingdom. The poem is called In the Time of Pandemic by Kitty O'Meara, and I read a piece of it about the pandemic. And they listened more deeply. Some meditated, some prayed, some danced. Some met their shadows. And the people began to think differently. And the people healed. And in the absence of people living in ignorant, dangerous, and heartless ways, the earth began to heal. And when the danger passed and the people joined together again, they grieved their losses and made new choices and dreamed new images and created new ways to live and heal the earth as they had been healed.